Hi everybody, this is lecture number 3, unit 6. All revolutions display a pattern. Political stuff, revolutions in Europe during the 1800s. Alright, so this is lecture number 3, political revolutions in Europe and beyond during the 1800s. Just want to note that information for this lecture was gathered in part from Prentice Hall's brief review in global history, as well as from your textbook. Alright, so following Napoleon's downfall marked the end of the French Revolution, but there were many more revolutions to come during the 1800s across Europe, and even as far away in places like Latin America and Mexico. I'm going to explain each of the places in terms of genos. Remember genos? All revolutions share certain characteristics, or at least have similar circumstances surrounding them. Let's start with Europe during the 1800s after Napoleon. First, we need a little background for these revolutions. Order and stability were restored in Europe following Napoleon's defeat. This order and stability occurred mostly due to an important meeting called the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Vienna is a city in Austria. Representatives from countries across Europe met to discuss what to do post-Napoleon. How do we restore order, they wondered. Basically, the Congress of Vienna put old monarchies back into power. Yes, that's right. Kings and queens held power again in places like France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. The most famous representative at this meeting was Clemens von Metternich, who wanted to return Europe to the way it had been before the French Revolution. Metternich, from Austria, was instrumental in helping to ensure that absolute monarchs returned to power across Europe. To make sure that things stayed that way for a while, the group of delegates at the Congress of Vienna formed an alliance between the countries that met, all pledging to support one another in the event of war. This alliance became known as the Concert of Europe. So it wasn't like some rock star concert, dude. No, the Concert of Europe. So yeah, concert is spelled like concert. Other representatives at the Congress of Vienna included Alexander I of Russia, a guy named Lord Castlereagh of England, and Maurice Talleyrand from France. The Concert of Europe alliance helped to ensure that there was a balance of power. So notice how I just slowed down when I said that. Balance of power. That might mean that maybe you write that down. Maybe it's important. Just maybe. Alright, so let me start that again. So the Concert of Europe alliance is going to make sure that there was a balance of power throughout Europe, meaning no single nation could ever become too powerful again, like the way France had become so powerful under Napoleon. This is really interesting in that two major countries weren't present at that meeting, Italy and Germany. Why? Because they weren't countries yet. And this is significant in the sense that once Germany became a nation, you're going to see them wanting to become very powerful in a short amount of time, thus disrupting the balance of power created in Europe by the Congress of Vienna and subsequent Concert of Europe alliance members. The Congress of Vienna also represented conservatism. People with conservative political beliefs back then, and in most societies I should say, believed that traditional ways of life should be preserved. Conservatives in Europe during the early 1800s were those people who supported monarchies and were against reactionary revolutionists and their leaders. So, the Congress of Vienna and the re-establishment of monarchies across Europe will actually lead to more revolutions because you have these conservatives in power and people are going to rebel against this conservative way of life. So let's look at all of this that I've just said right now using genos. G-E-N-O-S. Alright, so there were two huge revolutions in Europe following the Congress of Vienna. The Revolution of 1830 and the Revolution of 1848. Both revolutions had similar root causes. Alright, so let's look at these using genos. G. Government problems. People across Europe were appalled to have monarchs back in power. Common people had been inspired by the French Revolution and Napoleon. Enlightenment theories, especially John Locke's natural rights theory, about overthrowing your government if you didn't feel it adequately protected your natural rights, those were especially popular. In 1830, a revolution across Europe resulted in overthrowing of monarchs and replacing these monarchs with new leaders, or even other monarchs that the people supported. This happened in France, where a guy named King Charles X was replaced by King Louis Philippe. Looks like Philip, but with an extra P and E on the end. Belgium also became its own nation. It had been the Spanish Netherlands, but had been taken over by the Netherlands. Well, the people who lived there declared themselves an independent nation from the Netherlands. In Italy, revolutionaries are going to fight to make Italy a unified country. But they weren't successful. That happened much, much later. In Poland, revolutionaries tried to get rid of Russian rule, but they failed. In 1848, another series of revolutions swept across Europe. In France, Louis Philippe, he was actually overthrown, and a republic was established under someone named Napoleon III. He was actually Napoleon's nephew. All right, so there were government problems all over Europe, and we're going to see many revolutionary actions against these governments. All right, and E, economic issues in Western Europe. So economic issues. We know that in much of Europe, the middle classes and working classes, and that's to say the common factory workers in the middle class, and as well as the bourgeois middle and upper class people, they're going to start to be at odds with one another. Economic class conflict is going to emerge as Europe begins to industrialize. In Eastern Europe, in places like Russia, many former serfs had been given their freedom, from the feudal era. But these recently freed serfs had no money and were powerless in society. This caused economic class conflict in Russia. So basically, in both Western and Eastern Europe, we're going to begin to see conflicts between the haves and the have-nots of society, between the rich and poor. This was really apparent in France during the Revolution of 1848, in which upper and middle class people tried to control the government, and they're going to start to fight against the poor and working classes who were revolting against them. It left a legacy of bad feelings in France between the various social classes. Have you ever seen Les Miserables? There you go. All right, N, new ideas and theories. Two new ideas and theories that were inspired by revolutionary thoughts in Europe were liberalism and nationalism. The revolutions of 1830 and 1848 were inspired by these two relatively new theories from the 1800s. Liberals in Europe during the 1800s were those activists or revolutionaries who were opposed to monarchs in power. These people wanted democratic republics established. Nationalism was also another relatively new idea during the 1800s. People who believed in nationalism wanted independent nation-states, or countries, that were free from foreign rule. Later in the 1800s, this sense of nationalism is going to help lead to the creation of two new countries in 1870 and 1871, Germany and Italy. All right, that brings us to the O in GENOS, other revolutions. Remember, other revolutions can have a huge impact on whether or not another revolution happens elsewhere. The French Revolution had a profound impact on the revolutions of 1830 and 1848, as well as all those Enlightenment ideas that had been so influential on the French Revolution itself. All right, S, social inequality. The revolutions of 1830 and 1848 were inspired by many factors, but especially by the ill feelings that resulted from the differences in social classes across Europe. Additionally, in some countries like Russia, there were some major social issues taking place. Russia is a massive country with many ethnic groups. The Russian czars, the kings that ruled Russia, czars, Caesar, emperor, right. The Russian czars had a history of persecuting ethnic minorities in order to create feelings of nationalism. Czars like Alexander III established policies that tried to make people more Russian. This is called Russification. Under this policy, Jewish people in Russia were targeted and made scapegoats for social problems. Because of this state-sponsored anti-Semitism, Jews were often victims of targeted violence in Russia, called pogroms. So the revolutions of 1830 and 1848 are clear examples of Genios in action. Thanks for listening.